I'm doing some poems from the First World War, and I don't pretend that you haven't heard these a million. I'm not picking obscure things. I'm picking the very well-known ones. If you don't mind, if you will bear with me reading them,
Oh no, I love
because
doing this.
I actually they're famous and they endure because they deserve to be
Yeah,
famous
exactly.
and endure. And I make I don't really apologise for
shouldn't.
reading them. They're very very well known. You won't have any difficulty recognising these. And the first one is probably the most famous of all, and it was written by a doctor on the front line in the Western Front. His name was he was I think it was a colonel or a major or a colonel in the Royal Army Medical Corps, and his name was John McCrae.
Oh,
You'll know now
Yeah, I know
exactly
it.
what I'm going to read.
Yeah,
And it's called In Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky the larks, still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields.
Very good.
So that's a bit. I like this idea. He says a torch. We say to pass the baton. To pass the baton on to the next generation or those that succeed us. Saying we've done our bit. So another one now from Wilfred Owen. It's the Anthem for Doomed Youth. Again, this is a very famous poem. So Wilfred Owen, Anthem for Doomed Youth. What passing bells for those who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifles' rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries for them, no prayers, nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill demented choirs of wailing shells and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall. Their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds. So, doomed youth in a 19, 14, 15, 16, 17, I suppose.
Well, actually, Wilfred Owen didn't really start writing poetry till quite late.
Quite late. It was quite late. Yes.
I mean, he was only 25 when he died, but I don't think he started writing poetry till about either just before the war, just after it started.
Was there any money in writing poetry? I mean, was it something
Well, it used
people
to be.
bought?
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean,
Yeah.
I think.
Like you would buy a novel?
Yeah. Well, because people read, I suppose.
Well, yeah. I mean,
People
it's
read a
more,
lot
I
more.
suppose.
It's,
Well,
in
certainly
Victorian
people
times, I
read
think
more.
people read a lot more poetry. It's almost on par with fiction, wasn't it? Really, I suppose.
Well, I
in a
suppose
way.
middle and upper class people read. Lower class, working class people
Couldn't.
didn't. Well, it's not that they couldn't read. They probably didn't have time to read.
They didn't have access
couldn't-
to books.
They didn't
Couldn't
have the
afford the
access
books.
to books. No, couldn't afford the books.
When did libraries come out?
Well, the first public libraries, I suppose, in the early part of the century. Probably the late part of the 19th century.
I think
they
the late part
possibly
of-
started then.
I think it developed out of Working Men's Association,
Yes,
the Workers
Working Men's
WEA,
Clubs
the
and
Workers'
things.
Educational
Yeah,
Association, and they had wonderful institutions, especially in the part of the world you're from, Paul.
But
You know,
north-
in the heavy industrialised north and northwest, and they were called the Mechanics Institutes.
Yeah,
and I
no,
suspect in many of the towns up in Lancashire,
They've got it
you
in
still got them
stone.
on the buildings to this day, Mechanics Institute.
Yeah, yeah. It was
And
carved in.
it's carved in stone. And these were the open sesame for the working class man. As long as he could read or write, it provided him with access to books, and of course with books came ideas. With ideas became the beginnings of self-education, and it was the emphasis was on self-education.
I remember my father used to go to night school to
Well,
better himself.
Yes,
Well, my dad went to night school, did his engineering degrees.
Mm.
But there were schools. There were schools where kids went to learn to read and write because they left school. They were probably 12.
Yeah, it was. I was trying to think of the date. I should know this because I had to read it for my.
Because they started out
teaching
with
degree.
like dame schools. They used to
Yeah,
call
there
them
were dame schools, and then
didn't
there
they?
were the ragged schools.
Yeah.
But that's really quite early on. The first act that said every child must have some kind of it was 2 years, I think, as well.
Education.
Rudimentary education was as late as 1860, 1870.
Yes.
Mm.
And it's only for a couple of years.
So it's only just over 100 years.
And
150
the
years.
teaching, just if you don't know this, because there were huge numbers that had to be taught, and the government or the local authorities, as they were then, were unwilling to pay huge, to have a lot of teachers. The teaching was done by what was called the Monitorial System, and it worked that the ones at the top of the school were taught to teach the younger
Yes.
ones, the younger ones,
Yes.
the younger ones coming up behind.
But you
So-
get that in Jane Eyre.
Yes,
You
yeah.
have that
Yeah.
in Jane Eyre, although she was sent away to school that was because of, for
So is
orphan girls and what have you. But you had a lot of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I assume, I don't know if it was the same in boys' schools, but the older girls became the teachers in there.
Became the teachers.
Because she then went out
They'd
to
be
be
under,
she then went out to become a governess, didn't she?
That's right.
Yeah.
You also had the monitors and the fags and the older boys would discipline the younger boys. Was that
But
the
that would
same
have been
principle?
that would have been in independent.
That would have been in
Control.
the what we call the public schools.
Yeah.
I'm really talking about state education here,
Yeah.
and this is the way that they could cope with the vast numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the what we call prefects, the people at the top of the school, would be taught by the one teacher. You go and take that group over there, you go and take that group over there, and teach them the alphabet, which of course the elder ones would have known by that time, and elementary arithmetic.
Well, of course, much teaching in those days involved rote learning anyway, didn't it? So
It was rote learning. It was
yeah.
basically just
it
to
wasn't-
read,
It
write.
wasn't so-called teaching children how to think.
No.
Oh no! It was to make
It
them
was
basically numerate.
Make them numerate.
And there was a reason for that, Alice. Don't ever think it was just pure
Altruism.
altruism. It
No.
wasn't pure altruism at all. It was to make them able to cope with the increasing pressures or complexities of working in the factories that they needed. And there was such a shortage. To give you an example, I know this from my reading when I did my degree. There was such a shortage towards the end of the century, in the 1880s, 1890s, of trained clerks, people who could read and write, that huge numbers of clerks were brought over to this country from Germany.
Oh, really?
So many German names you hear. Beck is a very common name if you think about it.
Of course
That's a
it's
German name.
isn't it?
And many of them, the Germans were much, much better, much, much earlier than us, than giving people a good basic education.
Yeah.
And we tapped into that because we didn't have enough people. That has a familiar ring to it,
Look
doesn't
at
it?
the way they educate children in the Far East
Yes.
compared to how we educate
Yeah.
them, and how much more literate and numerate they
Yes.
are than we are.
Yeah. Much earlier.
Yeah, much earlier
Yeah.
because they insist on discipline. They insist on discipline
Yeah.
in their schools, and B, you learn things by heart.
Yeah.
You learn to memorise things.
You-
And
you-
they just
you-
do not teach that anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, my memory is not what it was, but I still try and memorise things to a
Yes.
certain extent.
Yes.
You know, I
Yeah.
think it's good to remember
It-
a few lines of poetry, or
Yeah.
the 3 creeds. I can memorise. I
Yes.
memorise the Apostles' Creed.
Yeah.
Well,
The
a few
Nicene
lines.
Creed you
And I
read
think
to us
it's
the other
good
day.
to be able to do that.
Yeah.
It's good for your brain, if nothing else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You've got whole swathes of people that left school and don't actually own or have ever read a book since.
Well, my son's never read it. Caleb will never read a book.
No, wouldn't dream of it.
And even though you saw me reading, his father used to read, and Hannah read some, but nothing like I would have read at a young age. But then we didn't have distractions, did we?
Didn't have distractions. I mean, I am about 15 years older than you, Alice, and when I was in my formative years, in my late 8, 9, 10, very early teens, there was nothing but books.
Yeah.
There was the old radio you could listen to, Dick Barton's Special Agent, and a few things like that. It was a very high quality in those days, the radio, and there were books. So all my generation read
And then you got the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yes,
people
yes.
selling
Well, I remember
books.
we had a set of the Arthur Mead children's.
Yes,
Children's
Arthur Mead's book,
encyclopedias. I loved those.
children's
I loved them.
children's encyclopedias.
I loved
I used
them.
They come up in auction every now and again.
The one I
I
used to
loved
like
them.
at Christmas that you got was the Pears
Pears.
Encyclopedia.
It was the one volume, wasn't it? One
Yeah.
volume, very compact. The Pears Encyclopedia.
Yeah.
And that told you all the basic facts about the world. And if your parents were wealthy, they buy a set of encyclopedia, proudly displayed in the living room on the bookcase. About 20 volumes of this thing, or one volume for
How
every
much was
letter.
ever read is another matter.
Well, yes. It's not something you read from end to end. The idea was you could dip into it. All knowledge was there. You want to know the answer to anything. Now,
Yeah, well, when I was growing up, we had a TV sometimes, and it didn't always work very well. And you couldn't get a picture, and you only had like 2 channels anyway, and that was only from like 6 o'clock in the evening or something ridiculous, wasn't it? Or you'd have Blue Peter.
And then you stood
And then
to
there was
attention when
nothing.
the Queen, God
And
save
then there
the
was
Queen.
nothing.
And then the picture diminished.
And my parents, we had the radio. I remember the radio. But mostly I had books.
yes, yeah.
I remember reading an enormous amount when I was a kid.
There was
And then we had Radio Luxembourg.
it was then
I
radio,
remember my
Radio
sister-
Caroline, and all
my
those things.
sister listening to Luxembourg with her little brown transistor.
And then you used to have to try and record it without,
God,
and you used to stop it before the DJ said anything. Anyway,
do you remember just one last thing? Do you remember a wonderful thing? We're about the same. You're younger than me, Paul. I know. A wonderful magazine called The Boy's Own Paper. Do you remember the BOP?
I do. I remember the Boys' Own
It
Annual,
was
the
so
Eagle Annual.
well. The Boy's Own Paper. It came out monthly, I think. And the articles in there was a very, very high standard. You had geography, history, everything. Totally uncompromising in terms of vocabulary and syntax, sentence construction. And I learnt so much from those. I used to read those from cover to cover. I wish I'd kept them.
They do have books like that for children now, or magazines for children.
Yeah, there's one. Yes,
Aquila, is it?
Aquarius or Aquila, something like
Aquila.
that. That's right, Paul. Yeah, that's an attempt anyway
Yeah.
to simulate
that.
what we used to have. Right, a couple more from me, and then we'll go around. Again, this is Rupert Brooke, and you know exactly what I'm going to read to you. The Soldier. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped, made aware, gave, once, her flowers to love, her ways to roam, a body of England's, breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by sons of home. And think, this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind, no less, gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given, her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends, and gentleness, in hearts at peace, under an English heaven. Little bits I suppose. Two more for you, and I don't want to hog the show.
That's a sonnet, isn't it?
Is it
Isn't that a
14?
sonnet?
3,
I think.
6,
14.
9, 12. That is a sonnet. You are
Sonnet,
absolutely
yeah.
right. You are absolutely
sweet.
right. Alice, it is indeed. Couldn't leave you without reading Dulce et Decorum Est, could I?
No.
And then there's one about women and war that I think is incredibly interesting. Dulce et Decorum Est, do you know what it means?
No.
It means sweet and fitting it is to die for one's country.
Well, that's the whole.
There's
saying,
no reason why you should have known
Dulce
that, Paul, because unless you've done Latin,
Dulce
you know.
et Decorum Est pro patrum mori is the whole thing, isn't it? She sort of comes at the end.
yeah, Dulce et Decorum Est pro patria mori to die. They didn't actually put that in the title, they're funny
Oh
enough.
no, at the bottom. It is.
And to say it's ironic, as you will hear, is another matter. So, Dulce et Decorum Est. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori.
Oh, so it was a lie.
So yeah,
That's his most famous poem.
it is his most, but yeah, it's powerful. It's powerful. The Germans started the gas.
Well, there are different kinds of gas as well. There wasn't just one. Was there?
There was the famous one. Mustard gas, the famous one that made them blind. You've seen that Nash painting. I think Nash, with one hand on front of the man in front, because they're all blind.
Yeah.
So the one on the front is leading this crocodile with one each with a hand on the shoulder of the man in front. You know, that sort of thing. It was an appalling weapon. You know. What can you say? Would we have used it if we thought of it first to gain the advantage? I mean, everything in warfare is to try and gain some kind of advantage. You see this very clearly in the air war in 1914-18. The next aircraft, either we produced or the Germans produced, had another couple of...
Who started the tank thing? Was that German?
That's us.
Was
us, yeah.
I didn't know. Did you? There's like 30 odd iterations of the Spitfire. I know that.
Yeah. They were up to Mark 28, 30, something like that when it finished. Yeah, yeah. We invented the tank. I mean, the Germans invented mustard gas.
They had the last. I mean, horses were used a lot in the First World War, weren't they?
Yes. Yeah.
The last cavalry charge was 1916, wasn't it? Well, they only had one in the First World War, and that was in 1916.
I thought it was earlier than that, Alice, but I'm sure you're right.
I think it was 1916. But of course, horses, and you think all those poor animals just would have been blown to pieces.
Yeah,
Shot.
actually used in combat, but of course
Yeah.
many of them were used to pull supplies
Yeah, they
up
were
to the
used
front.
to pull the
Wow.
guns and everything else, weren't they?
Yeah,
I mean, I was in. Well, we saw it in that film of those.
The war horse.
Those in the. Was it in the benediction film? Yeah, the horses up to their
yes, yeah.
bellies in all that mud.
Yes, and then it's horrible. I'm sure the men who control them, they bled for them really, because it's like the miners down the pit, Sanders. They got so fond of those animals,
Yeah, well,
didn't
they were
they?
all blind, weren't they?
Yes, they
Especially
were
the
blind.
canaries.
Yes, yeah. Well, don't know about that, but why should we mock a creature because it's so small? It appears to be insignificant. It has a life, doesn't it?
Look, I know a man.
They were
somebody who works at the
incredible.
sale room. He loves his. He's got a parrot, and he dotes on his parrot.
Parrot, yes, yeah.
Absolutely dotes on his parrot. He loves him.
It's not an
In
African
fact,
grey,
he's widowed, but he's had a lady friend for the last couple of years, and one of the things that's come between them,
is the parrot.
she doesn't like the parrot. She really doesn't like the parrot, and he said, it's really sort of, amongst other things, not just the parrot. It's one of the things that's come between them is Chico. Chico.
They're highly intelligent birds, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, I could understand why.
Well,
people
there's
get
one
from
on
bats.
YouTube called Tico in Florida. Oh, and this bird's amazing. And the guy, his owner, he plays the guitar, and the bird's on the coffee table, and he's strutting up and down, and he's singing along. It's incredible. I'll send you a link. He's amazing. He's lovely. He's very clever, very intelligent animal.
Can I read you one more?
One
Yes.
more, yeah.
We'll stand one more. It's by Siegfried Sassoon, but I suspect you may not know it.
Well, I haven't read a lot of Sassoon's
Well,
poetry yet.
But it's
I'm
called
working my way through it.
it's called Glory of Women. And it's quite interesting. if you
Oh,
listen
from a
to
homosexual.
Yeah.
it. We won't go there. I think the homoerotic input on that film's a little bit OTT, don't you?
I think so.
Well,
It was a bit.
Michael
it was too
probably
much.
enjoyed it.
No, he did say there was too much of it.
It was a bit
Bit
beyond.
stereotyped.
Okay, here we go, and then you'll be rid of me. Glory of Women. You love us when we're heroes home on leave or wounded in a mentionable place. You worship decorations, you believe that chivalry redeems the war's disgrace. You make us shells, you listen with delight, by tales of dirt and danger fondly thrilled. You crown our distant ardours while we fight, and mourn our laurelled memories when we're killed. You can't believe that British troops retire when hell's last horror breaks them and they run, trampling the terrible courses, blind with blood. O German mother dreaming by the fire while you are knitting socks to send your son, his face is trodden deeper in the mud. So it's really saying, of course, the women at home, the men at the front were a hero. There's nothing heroic about any of this
I know.
whatsoever. I hadn't read that before I was looking for this stuff today. And that really made an impact on me.